Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Salam alaikum. Very, very pleased to have you here at tonight's Justified event. Thank you all for coming. My name is Anna Jacobson. I lead our Sustainability, Resilience and ESG services for the EMEA region, and I am very thrilled to be the moderator here this evening. We're here to explore a topic that is at the very, very heart of climate conversation, the concept of a just transition as a very critical component in a successful shift to net zero. Although referenced at COP24 and COP26, this is the first time just transition has been on the agenda formally at a COP. We all in this room realize that very bold and urgent actions are needed to address the climate crisis. Achieving global net zero ambitions will require unprecedented economic, industrial, and technological transformation in all countries and radical collaboration across all facets of society. The purpose of tonight's event is to bring together diverse, multi-sector voices to discuss the practical steps required to translate a noble ambition into on-the-ground action, as we saw in this very excellent video. Through our panel and also audience Q&A, we'll seek to cut through the complexity, shifting the conversation very much from a philosophical debate into pragmatic discussion of the role we all can play to enable real progress. We've seen the latest report from the IPCC. It shows that the UN SDGs are not going to be achievable if we continue to live in a world that is driven by fossil fuels. So how do we move forward to low carbon economy in a way that leaves no one behind? That is the topic we're here to explore. That very delicate balancing act between what we require to deliver a transition that not only delivers on the ambitious emission reduction goals that we need to achieve, but is also aligned with and very much integrated with sustainable development ambitions. Now, enough for me for now. I'm going to bring to the stage our amazing panel. First up, please welcome Dr. Adil Al-Sarouni. Dr. Adil is an Emirati leader of entrepreneurial teams. He is the founder of Citizen School and the CEO of Al-Sarouni Emirates Investments. Please welcome Dr. Adil. Next up, please welcome Veronica Scotti. Veronica is the Group Managing Director and Chair for Public Sector Solutions at global insurer Swiss Re. Our third panelist is Lauren Sorkin. Lauren serves as the Executive Director for the Resilient Cities Network. And finally, our fourth panelist, please welcome to the stage Kasper Molte-Let. Kasper leads the Bed and Bird office in Denmark, and he is also a partner there in the corporate group. He is a member of the firm's global board and sits on the firm's sustainability committee. Please welcome Kasper. I would also like to welcome my wonderful colleagues, James Verrey. He is our corporate sustainability lead. And do you want to, I don't know, wave or something, James, so people can see you? And Dr. Tesh Gida, who is our global lead for future energy. And James and Tesh are going to help facilitate audience questions. And they're going to be sort of roving around with their mics, ready to take your questions or comments. So please, as you think of them, note them down so you don't forget, and be ready to partake in the debate. We're going to kick off the discussion now by asking our panel a few questions before we then hand over to you, our esteemed guests. So I'd like to just kick it off with an opening question, which I will ask all of you to please reflect on. What have you seen, heard, observed that has maybe surprised you, inspired you, potentially even shocked or disappointed you at this year's COP? We start with you, please, Dr. Adel.
I love the fact that this event is happening in the region today. What surprised me, I have to say, the eagerness and how furious actually has the government and the representative of the chair actually of COP28 and adamant in making sure that this COP28 comes with very tangible outcomes. Like the insistence was quite strange from my perspective, but I loved it. I loved the fact that we're super clear to make sure that what comes out of this is something distinguished and it's something that would have a positive impact.
Thank you so much. Veronica, can we come to you next, please?
So what I'm very impressed by is just the sheer inclusivity of this COP. If we look at the number of people that are attending, it's the largest on record, and I don't know where the next one will really take place, but I think it's incredible, right, that we have nearly 100,000 participants. That goes to show how climate agenda is no longer just a preoccupation for Ministry of Environment. The other thing that I was very surprised, if I can be honest about that, is on day one, the tone was set with very high expectations for ambition, action coming through very, very strongly. So at this point, and I think maybe the number is already superseded, but we have over 70 billion of capital being mobilized around the top thematics, and that's very meaningful. The methane pledges, reducing 30% by 2030, you know, that's a big win. But also the attention to adaptation, which is very close to my heart, because I think we need to very much push on bringing adaptation on the same level as mitigation. And while I don't think we are exactly there, I think the attention has never been quite as high as this. But since we are at the Justified event, I'm a personal admirer of Madame Al-Mubarak, and I know that she really cares for inclusion and justice, and I think we need to do more work in becoming more fluent there. What does that mean?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. More fluent in what just transition mean. Absolutely. Lauren, can we move to you?
Thank you for the question. It has been a very interesting COP. It's been a very different COP. I think probably as some of you have been working in the space for almost 2 decades, and so as we say in the States, this is not my first rodeo, but it's a very different one. Because of that momentum, because of the numbers, and also because of the role of the private sector in COP. that has changed dramatically over the last 2 decades. Where you had government-to-government negotiations as the main stage and some small civil society and other conversations with the private sector happening on the sides, the tables have turned quite a bit, and no one is waiting for the outcomes of the formal negotiations at the end of the week to get things done and to make announcements. So that's been, I think, I would agree with you on that side, that's been extremely exciting. I think the other surprise, and I think it's a pleasant surprise, and Casper and I were talking about this right before the panel, is that so many times this week I have heard the phrase, mitigation is not enough. In fact, I think if I had $1 billion, just $1 billion, for every time I heard that this week, then we could probably solve that trillions of dollars of financing gap for critical and resilient infrastructure, or so I would argue. But it's not just how many times I've heard it, it's actually the way I've heard it, because I think saying adaptation or saying mitigation wasn't enough and we needed adaptation used to be seen as a white flag and almost like a dirty word. Oh, talking about adaptation investment, right, with a small a and a small I. But now people are talking about that in a way that is mobilizing, and it's a call to action, and I think that's really refreshing too.
Thank you so much. Casper.
Thank you, Anna. Well, first of all, I think that coming home from COP, I'll go home inspired and also very hopeful. I have 3 kids at home, and they are in their late teens and early 20s, and they said when they heard I was going to COP, they said, "Dad, please tell everybody down there to hurry up. This is serious business." And I think, what is amazing to see is that whereas earlier COPs have always, focused on the more meta level and the macro projects, there are so many amazing, fantastic, very big state and government initiatives, very big businesses. But the granularity that we see at this COP, I was at a panel discussion yesterday where the topic was fast forwarding environmental permitting, so we make sure that all the amazing sustainability and green energy projects around the globe, they don't get caught up in red tape. And just being able to sit and discuss with this and have a lot of interested people listening in shows that we are actually now down to a level where we actually want to do something about this, and how do we get it to work in our administrations. And I actually think one of the panelists, she had a great point where she said, it's all about the 3 Ps, planet, profit, and people. And even when discussing environmental permitting, she said, of course we all want to save the planet, and we have to do it in an economically viable way, and maybe the businesses want to earn $1 on their way, but we can't forget the people, because the people is the most important thing, and we have to make sure that we see to it that people don't get left out in the equation. And that was probably the perfect takeaway for today's topic. So,
fantastic, thank you. And there certainly has been a lot of discussion around mobilizing capital for adaptation measures as well as mitigation measures. And I think the regulatory aspect has been raised quite a few times in terms of what can we do to reduce the red tape, the administrative burden, to really accelerate the deployment of renewable energy technologies. And I know it's a point we're going to come back to you on later, Casper, in terms of what we can learn internationally on that. But I'm going to kick off with the question for Lauren, please. I think you bring a very interesting international perspective to this conversation tonight. You have such a wide range of city leaders within your network, and some of them are actually with us tonight, so welcome to you. What would you suggest are some of the primary considerations for people who sort of shape our cities and decision makers operating in that urban context, when it comes to enabling the fair transition? Particularly if we consider our sort of ever-growing cities, they're largely at the front line of those adaptation measures that are so desperately needed.
Thanks for the question. And I think for those of you who are not so familiar with Resilient Cities Network, we're a network of 100 cities, 100 city leaders working in 40 countries all around the globe. And our mission is to ensure that the residents of those cities have the capacities to survive, adapt, and thrive in the face of all different types of shocks and stresses. And I think we have Chief Resilience Officers from Calgary and Cape Town in the audience, so I don't know if you're still there. If you are, maybe give a wave. But they have lots of knowledge to share, and so I would say that if you want to really get into what it takes to build resilience, you should seek them out after the panel break. But in terms of how do we get there and what are some of the considerations that we need to keep in mind, I think first and foremost, and I think actually, it was something that Gareth said very well earlier, our CRO from Cape Town, when we were talking about the just transition and the energy transition. He said, you actually have to start with what the needs are. Because when you're delivering for communities, you're not starting with a climate angle, right? You're starting with the angle of economic development, or you're starting with what's missing, what are the gaps in services. And so to take that into how do you actually get the work done, you really have to look at your cities as an integrated and holistic system. And you really have to start with what your key opportunities are and also what your key risks are. And you have to look at those on not just a short-term next term of the city leader, but on a medium-term basis. And so in the Resilient Cities Network, we've been working to do that for the last 10 years. And a couple of innovations that we have been working towards in partnership with some in this room, I would mention just three, and there are many others, but I think a core three. One is actually around institutional innovation. And we found that it was critical for cities, like in companies, to have a role of what would be akin to a chief risk officer in a company, but to have a chief resilience officer and have someone who is thinking on a longer term basis about the opportunities and the risks of a city in an integrated way. The other piece of this work has been around creating strategic tools and frameworks that allow folks to take that integrated look at the future of the city. And we've developed tools for that in not just a macro city scale, but also for energy, for water. And we also do quite a lot of work around circular economy to bring that together. So that's just a few of the points that I think are really important. You have to do this with intention. You have to invest in people who have the capacity to do this work. You have to meet communities where they are. And you have to take on board with you in the work that you do frameworks that are going to hold you to account and hold you to account in delivering multiple benefits.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that, meeting communities where they are. And I don't know, we have Steve Scott in the audience. If anyone is interested, waving about finding out more about our work we were doing with Scottish Government in Grangemouth, because it's a fantastic example of doing just that in terms of being very needs-led and letting communities influence in terms of how you drive a just transition. Dr. Adil, can I go to you next, please? I mean, we've just had the sort of grassroots city-level perspective from Lauren in terms of enabling that just transition and at the sort of community basis. What I really love about your role as a founder of the Citizen School is that ability, I guess, to bring in the education piece to this and educating the next generation, I guess, of sustainability leaders. So I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on the role that education will play as we move to a fair and just transition, and I guess preparing, the workforce for tomorrow in terms of the skills that are going to be needed.
Thank you very much. I'd attend to it from a couple of angles, if you'll allow me. Yes. First of all, to understand the role of the education system in the last 200 years, and that it needs to change. The last 200 years, schools existed the way they are for a very legitimate purpose, and that was to produce a lot of people of similar skills. And that is due to the huge jump in human population. So you had 300,000 years, 1 billion, and only 200 years, we are at 8 billion. okay? So 200 years of a lot of humans. That's thanks to vaccination, actually. So you needed to produce a lot of the same. And the education system was not concerned with one key element about us. It was not concerned with our quality of life. It was mainly concerned with getting those resources out and predominantly employed to support growing the necessary infrastructure to cater for this huge population, coming population. But that is changing now. We are, at this point in time, 10% of the population is above 65 years old. By 2080, it will be 25% of the population above 65 years old. Now, when we talk about the environment and the negative effect and the fact that we need to care about for the next generation, it's actually not only the next generation, it's the older version of us. Because we are aging quite a lot. Yeah? This is why most of the growth in human population is actually going to be through aging. And by the end of this century, there will be a huge drop in human population. And that's because we are already decaying as a species. So thanks God that economically it's not good news, but probably for the nature, for the environment, it's not a very bad news. Yeah? Not to say that the world is overpopulated. I don't believe the world is overpopulated. I think if you have a good growing population with the right practices, then great. That becomes a win-win situation. Now, going to practices. How many of you, if I allow with a show of hand, if you don't mind, know how to gauge their quality of life? There is one there, 2, 3. That's actually much higher as in numbers from any audience that I've seen. How many of you have asked themselves the question of, or wondered how can they gauge their own quality of life? There's a larger number than I have ever seen in my life. But what that tells you is, you get now the gap in between what you think schools or the education system is meant to produce versus what you believe they should have done. They should have educated us about how to gauge our own quality of life, enhance it for ourselves, so that then we can enhance it for others. And that is very much inclusive of the question about the effect of the environment on oneself and vice versa. Today, and that's a key point that I wanted to highlight. Yeah? Another key point I want to highlight is that in the minds of us, and probably less within this audience than the rest of the average human, and in the minds of the kids, the environment is something that is a third party. It's the whales up in the, in Antarctica, or the forest in Brazil, or it's not something that I'm involved with. It's that turtle that has the plastic straw in their nose. It's that. It's never themselves. And whenever we talk about even educating them, it's all about recycling, and it's all about, the plastic bottle, and it's all about, planting a tree. I beg to take it to the next level, and that the next level has been attended to through science, but have never been translated to curriculums, whereby they actually induce that concern with the environments, both directions, in the minds of the kids. And so it becomes second nature to them. Like today, handling math equations is second nature. Why understanding their impact on the environment and the other way around is not second nature? Why don't we tell the kids that, by the way, 30% of garments are only worn once, and that the effect of the garment industry is almost equal to the logistics industry, the negative effect of it on environment? Why don't we tell them that the waste of furniture manufacturing goes to the moon and back every 6 months? Why didn't they know that with this very simple effect of environment in both ways would actually guide them to take better decisions about what they wear and the need for them to break that furniture and not do that, or dirtying something so that it needs to be changed, and that would have a negative effect on the environment. So I think there is the element of really giving them the science, understanding effect of the environment both ways, and that it translates into a curriculum. And when I say curriculum, it's not something that I'll be tested on at the end of the month. It's something that I need to live in. And with that, I believe if you ask me of all the different practices beside law and beside infrastructure and everything else, I think getting it to become a second nature at the kids at the school level would have the highest impact, in my opinion. To do so, the last point, we need to start with the teachers. They are meant to be the mentors, but they are ignorant. How would they teach something they don't understand? We then need to involve the parents. So when you talk about education, it needs to be an ecosystem that involves everybody around the kid. And you put it in the school system because everybody fears that the kid won't get the certificate at the end of the year. So you can't put pressure on everybody. At the end of the day, though, they will understand that it is for their own betterment and it will lead to their quality of life. The moment you put quality of life as the measure, everybody starts getting concerned and they would want to have it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I love that sort of rethinking quality of life. And I'm sure there's lots of people now thinking, I need to start capturing what that is for me. And also the comment you made around education, yes, around the science, but it's also behavioral change that we need to really drive and foster. Thank you. Don't worry, we'll have time. Plenty of time for Veronica, because we're really keen to understand your perspective continuing on this theme of sort of empowering people and communities. You know, how does insurance fit into the mix? You often hear about capital. Insurance seems to be taking kind of the lesser sort of focus in terms of the financial services sector. So how does insurance fit into that in terms of enabling and creating the right environment and the right socioeconomic conditions, I guess, to sort of better help communities, especially vulnerable communities, to absorb shocks and threats coming from climate, and what can be done to really create equitable, I guess, access for people and communities.
And I'm really enjoying this conversation because we started with Lauren around, you know, designing our cities in a way that can be livable. And with Adil, we're talking about what is it that we value, what do we reward? And what you spoke about is contextualizing. So let me try and offer another contextualization thought here. Just this year, in 2022, the year that closed, we had economic losses of 275 billion related to natural catastrophes. That goes to add to the 747 billion, give or take, of healthcare related losses or gaps. And another, I'm going to say 540, again, my colleagues will know even better, per annum, again, billion related to mortality. So when you put it all together, we're looking at trillion of value, and this is just simply being measured in dollar sign, but that does not capture everything. That lack of preparedness, cost us. So to know that, and to know that we together can work towards better preparedness, pre-arranged financing, mechanism through which, we can all look to actually more at the upside rather than be concerned about livability of conditions, affordability of housing, ability to put food on the table. For me, it's something that motivates me to go to work every day, to be honest. And my job is about working on addressing either market failures where those exist, or developing markets where markets do not exist. So it is with that in mind that we engage with public sector counterparts around the world, including municipalities and including education systems, to make sure that this sense of how do we close this gap and actually create a more livable, enjoyable society is brought to bear. And we find that what we need to do is typically work with populations that are the most vulnerable at the core. So I can give you hundreds of examples. I'm going to use one that I think to me lends a concept that is still very nascent and I would love to see developed. So we are used to protecting assets. When I deal with public sector counterparts, they want us to protect the roads and their infrastructure and the bridges and their hospital. And by the way, over 70% of these public assets around the world are not protected. In many cases, they're not even on register. So that's a huge gap that needs to be closed. But hardly ever there is a concept within the administrations to protect interests, population interests. So we've been working very hard on introducing this concept of an insurable interest that goes beyond physical assets, which is the well-being and the resilience of populations. One of such projects was executed earlier this year, and I'm happy because it also, for its innovation, it was recognized. And it was for the innermost vulnerable community, for instance, in New York City. And we worked together with the mayor's office, but also with the Center for New York Neighborhoods, and with the Environmental Defense Fund. Just tells you already, just there as 3 counterparties, to put in place a parametric cover because an indemnity cover, traditional insurance cover, is unthinkable in this context, to make sure that we can create fast and flexible financing means. So if the shock happens, and in this case is inner city flooding, which is extremely difficult to model, and it took us a year to put together, they can get immediate economic relief and immediate responsiveness after an event. And it is important because we had to develop the technology together with others, so it's something that Swiss Re by itself would have not been able to do, but we've been investing in the technology know-how so that this can happen literally within the matter of hours. And the next partnership that we hope to take to market next year will allow us to actually integrate the payout to the population so that if populations are pre-registered, they will get the money straight away. That is something that the administrations are working around. We want to work around extreme heat, which is again a very chronic problem, and it affects again the most vulnerable and the most disadvantaged around the world. 2 days ago, we announced a partnership with the Climate Resilience for All, specifically for women that live in Pakistan and India. It's going to be a more international project, but we will be protecting these women that are operating outside on streets in very tough physical conditions where it becomes unworkable and unlivable, both protecting them physically so they don't get blisters, they don't get health issues, as well as providing insurance in case they cannot work, as they shouldn't in such weather conditions. It's both against extreme heat and flood again. So there is a lot that as an industry we've done where values are, where high value assets are, and we need to start looking at populations as also worth protecting.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Casper, let's look at sort of broad industry-wide policy setting now that sort of can support communities, people, countries in their ambition to transition in a fair manner. So from your perspective, both as a global board member, but also being Danish, the Danish government announced quite a generous aid package to workers that they're going to be seeing sort of affected by the transitioning away from oil and gas exploration and production in Denmark into a more renewable future. What are some of the learnings that can be shared for that, or what you're seeing more globally? Now, what do we need from regulation in order to ensure a just transition?
Well, thank you. Yeah, first of all, the Danish initiative that you just talked about is a brilliant example of local government legislation. We just got a new finance act. It includes a higher carbon tax, and government wants to use some of the proceeds from this to actually re-educate people that get affected by the higher carbon tax, and that is obviously people in the oil and gas industry. So, and this very much ties into what we see in the EU. The EU has made the Just Transition Mechanism, which is actually an umbrella for a lot of different projects, which comprises of a fund of over 55 billion euro that should be used to mitigate the consequences of the just transition to a zero carbon economy. But it's actually super exciting times as a lawyer when you see what is happening legislation-wise, because I think one of the issues over time in order to drive the whole transition has been that a lot of the initiatives have been voluntary. The SDGs, the United Nations Global Compact, they have all been voluntary initiatives that didn't really have any consequences if you didn't really live up to them. Now we are seeing for the first time, at least in the EU, that we are getting hard law on this. We already have the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which means that all businesses of a certain size for the financial year 2024 have to report on both social and environmental matters in their annual reports. This, of course, raises awareness in the businesses on what are our impacts, what do we need to report on, how do we measure it. So this is already driving a change. I think in relation to what we're discussing today, the new legislation that is being finalized as we speak, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, is very, very exciting and is going to probably have a global impact. It is the directive that in principle takes the United Nations, the UNGP, on business and human rights. They implement this as law in the EU, which means that all EU businesses or businesses operating in the EU of a certain size, they have to make a due diligence policy where they have to look at their own business, what social and environmental impacts does it have, but they also have to look at their full value chain, both up and down, so it's suppliers as well as customers. And this, of course, means that even though it's local legislation in the EU, it will have a global impact because you have to look at your full value chain also on businesses that are operating outside the EU. And basically what the legislation will do is that you have to identify what consequences your operations have. You have to have a plan for mitigation of any adverse risks or effects that your business have. And you also have to put up measures to prevent it. So this is a very, very, it's going to be a super important legislation globally because it's going to affect everybody that wants to do business with an EU business. So, and this legislation is being finalized as we speak. It is the hope that it will be adopted in 2024. It is a directive, so the member states have 2 years to implement it, so we probably do not see the more clear implications of it before in 2027, but at least the process is coming and will hopefully drive the same agenda also outside the EU.
Mm. And we're certainly seeing a lot of our clients already starting to think about how they can prepare for it and report to it, and that important integration of human rights principles and environmental principles when you look at your operation and value chain. Thank you, Kasper.
Yeah, that's already happening, so.
Yeah. I am going to throw it over to my dear colleague, Tej, to maybe take some questions from the audience at this point.
Actually going to throw it up to my dear colleague, James. Up
Right here.
there. Where is he?
Here's your deer, right here.
There you go.
And so maybe I'll just take the prerogative as the guy or one of the guys with the mic. And thank you to the panel for a fantastic discussion. And yeah, please, we can clap for the panel, absolutely. And if I could just maybe share a quick reflection of something that I thought of. So Veronica started out by talking, I think one of the first words you mentioned was inclusion. And then Dr. Adil, you talked about the need to change the way we think about our relationship with nature. And it made me think that a voice that we haven't heard yet that is really important, an important part of this discussion, is a voice representing indigenous peoples and that perspective, or those perspectives, because there is more than just one. But I know that we have some of our friends here that could speak to that. And so, Tej, do you see our friend Phil right there? Phil, could I impose upon you to just share
He looks absolutely thrilled.
I've never met you before, Phil, other than tonight, but I think everyone would really like to hear your perspective on a just transition.
First and foremost, Yama, I want to acknowledge that I'm on the country of another nation, and that's customary in my culture to acknowledge country and to pay my respects on behalf of Indigenous Australia to the hosting nation that I get to put my footprints on. Just transition. We've been transitioning since first contact, since 235 years. Economic prosperity has passed us by. We are thinking about nature-based solutions, and I want you to think about nature-based cultural solutions. Our cultural science, from an Aboriginal Indigenous Australians perspective, has sustained us on the driest inhabited continent on this planet since time immemorial. We have existed in a symbiotic relationship with country, and the respect of our responsibilities and obligations to care for country. So when we start thinking about transitioning into a future, I want you to think about nature-based cultural solutions, softer options. Cultural science and Western science, from my knowledge and through my cultural lens, do coexist, and they can create options to think about, a harder option or a softer option. And water's centrality to the survival of our people. I'm the first Indigenous chair of the Murray-Darling Basin, 1 million square kilometres of a river system in my country, and the economic prosperity, like our rivers, has flowed past us, right before our very eyes. We still are marginalised in a quality of life, a quality way of life, a cultural way of life, and economic prosperity. But we keep coming back to the table. I just want to share a personal transition. The formative years of my life, I wasn't recognised as a human being in my country's constitution. I was part of the flora and fauna. It was only in 1967 when 91.5% of Australia said, let's make a transition, let's amend the constitution. That was the first real impact, positive impact from my people. But as Indigenous people globally, we talk into mirrors. And when we talk about skills, I want you to think about what the future looks like through the eyes of our next generations. I'm sorry I was given 2 minutes, but how can you fit 235 years or 60,000 years of knowledge inside 2 minutes? So forgive me. If you had no computers, no electricity, no cars, how would you survive? What skills do you bring? Do you teach your kids to survive? My elders have taught me that. And we are teaching our next generation how to survive. Because we've got 500 communities in my country that don't have any water infrastructure at all. That delivers the right water at the right quality at the right time for longevity of life and quality of life. So I just want you to think about what a world looks like without money, what a world looks like without clothing. I've lived that. How many in this room have lived that and experienced that? And what skills are you equipping yourself with a changing world to transition? I'm sorry for being bold, but I didn't come over here to COP to play nice. I came over here to tell it as it is, as my grandfather. And one of the other key things that I stand very proud for is the rematriation of our women's knowledge into the dialogue. My mothers, our women, Indigenous women globally, their centrality to our families, their centrality to our education. We need to clear a space as men to allow them to take a leading role in the future of this globe.
Thank you.
Finally, I just want to say thank you for the invite. I hope I haven't offended anyone, but if I have, I'm sorry, but I don't care.
Thank you so much, Phil, and we certainly do need radical voices at this conference. Thank you so much for sharing. Do we have any questions from the audience, please?
I think we do have one more question here that before the panel maybe responds to Phil's comments. I think we have another question here.
Sure, and maybe I'll just not stand behind this tree. I'm gonna move over here. You know, I think it's been a very interesting discussion. My name is Shannon. I'm from Canada. I'm with a group called Energy for a Secure Future. I came to COP with 2 Indigenous leaders from Canada who are part of our work. And, you know, one of the risks in conversations around climate and the transformation of our energy systems is an acknowledgement of how this thing needs to look different in different places, the economic options that exist in you know, let's say urban Canada that don't exist in rural Canada or Iqaluit. You know, like Australia, many Indigenous peoples in Canada don't have access to drinking water in their communities. Sometimes there are housing issues. And the leaders who have come here are both former chiefs of their nations, and they're both at the forefront of Indigenous ownership for the first time in the history of the country in major liquefied natural gas projects. And the reason that they're at COP is they see this as a global emissions solution that addresses the energy security issues that we've seen over the last 18 months, the energy affordability issues they've seen over the last 18 months, and that continue, the explosion in coal use that has happened in 2022, and we're on track for it in 2023. And for them, they see this climate solution, but they see a solution that is finally ending poverty for them. And there hasn't been a lot of space for that discussion of how LNG as a fuel fits into where the world is trying to go in terms of its emissions. But we still have many very large countries and large emitters using the highest emitting fuels for lack of options. And I think there's a real coming together of this reconciliation and economic opportunity for Indigenous peoples in Canada with this global climate and emission solution that I'd love to hear you comment on, because it hasn't been such a part of the transition space.
Thank you. Anyone from the panel would like to comment? Veronica, maybe then Lauren?
I kick it off, and I think it is, that's exactly what I was saying, right? The just element of this transition really needs to be investigated at very granular level, because the intent is there, it's in the execution that then things may not fully come across as intended. So I really appreciate your question, and I happen to actually run our business in Canada, so I'm quite familiar with the progress that has been made in the last few years through the reconciliation exercise, the creation of the Indigenous Relationship Ministry, state to state, which I think is, I'm going to say foundational to resolving many of the issues that you hinted to. I can share my work with the multilaterals going that direction. So some of the discussions that we have, I think there is a dichotomy which I hope we can resolve as being a false dichotomy between decarbonizing and having footprint and having access to the basic infrastructures that are needed around the world to be able to have the economic inclusion, respectful relationship, opportunities for all. And natural gas and LNG is one of the topics that is being discussed because it's obviously not in and of itself the most, the cleanest form of energy, but relative to others it is still much better, and in some cases is the only option. And I think what I hope to see as, not just as a narrative, but actually in the way we go about decarbonization, is to see that there where there is not a problem of affordability or availability of alternatives, that's where we see the biggest strides towards a net zero or negative footprint, because it is possible in some parts of the world, and where that optionality does not exist, we have to look to the next best possible option. So we are, as an organization, we have made commitments to decarbonize to 2050, but we also see this need of the just element being proportioned to what's possible on the ground. And so I don't know if this satisfies your question, but I do believe there is element of that hasn't come through yet. In the same way as, it's beautiful to talk about smart grids, etc., but we all know that it's not always possible in all locations. And so in many cases, economic inclusion means, having small grids, renewable power on a very small scale, so that you can have water management, electrification that allows entire population to go from certain type of activities in the value chain in which they operate to much higher value added. Can I have another minute, Anna, and give an example of that? Because I really think, I don't mean to monopolize it, but it's something that has been on my mind a lot. So I'm very proud that we are supporting, and by no stretch of the imagination we are at the center. I'm worried when we are at the center of something. It means that we're making it very, very small and lacking in ambition. So very happy to be supporting a beautiful project that is called Drive, and it's sponsored by the World Bank, but it's actually executed with millions of pastoralists and farmers, small farm holders in the Horn of Africa. And those of you who are familiar with a bit of geography and climate will know that that region has been affected by nearly 10 years of drought. And it's certainly not the most stable part of Africa. So through this project, we're trying to do a total system redesign. We want to help those pastoralists get not only insurance, right? Because that is not going to solve their long-term viability. What they need is access to markets. They need to be able to move towards value chain activities that provide them with higher income. They need to be able to have practices that reduce that improves their quality of soils on which the cattle grow, so that the footprint can be reduced, that they have less vulnerability. They need to have access to tools, hence the ability to irrigate in areas that are very remote, right? And have access to electricity. And through this project, we're doing exactly that. And one of the things that I'm particularly proud of, we discussed that kids should not go and work, they should go to school and have access to appropriate education. And as a result of that, we're providing families also with income protection and with healthcare protection. So it's through this integrated approach where access to banking, access to funding for infrastructural investment that are reasonable in the area where they are, access to insurance, access to technology, we're making the difference for what was supposed to be 1 million people. Within 1.5 years, we are already covering 2 million people. So we're 2 years ahead of plan, and we're going for 10. And we cannot get enough funding and support for that. And it's designed to actually be also financially sustainable. So this is catalyzed by grant money, but it doesn't end with grant money. And I'm proud to be able to be associated with projects that can do this total economic transformation. And hopefully we can do something like that in Canada too.
What a fantastic example. Thank you so much for sharing. I think, Lauren, I saw you sort of sitting, wanted to contribute. Are you okay? Dr. Adil, did you want to come in on the on this topic as well?
I think there was a lot that was covered, and
Yes.
I would say that I really wanted to acknowledge the comments and the sharing that Phil made, because I think it's really important that in this entire conversation we don't rush forward with new solutions to solve things that people can solve for themselves. And I think at the core of what you also shared is that same story. And we do a lot of work that I won't go into detail about right now, but through our Urban Power program, where we do look at what community infrastructure needs are around the energy transition, and then we use that framework as a convening tool. And the communities in place lead that discussion around the appropriate technologies and how they want to use them to have more resilient lives. So that's work that's going on in Africa and Latin America. We're bringing it to Asia as well, and we're happy to share more later.
Fantastic. Perhaps over some networking later. Did we have any more questions from anyone in the audience, please?
Yes, we've got one right here, Anna.
Hello, everyone. My name is Martina Giuvara. I am a strategic planner for cities, and I'm here as an observer in the COP process for the International Society of City and Regional Planners. I have not quite a question, it's more a remark. If there is something that I understood very, very clearly in this process and over the past few years, is that our own economy, our own way of life across the world has been based for centuries on extraction of resources. And the gentleman from the indigenous communities was talking about symbiosis. We have abandoned symbiosis centuries ago. It's not just the fossil fuel, it's even before that. So if we want to move to a different place, we need to really completely imagine a completely different way of life and a completely different future. That requires very deep systemic change, but even before that, needs a new perspective, a new way of understanding. And we have to recognize that our own values, the way we've been educated, brought up, we are no different from the teachers that you were mentioning earlier on. We have not an understanding of what the world needs to be. We didn't suck it up with mother's milk. We sucked up the wrong set of values. So the inclusive process of hearing different voices and trying to figure it out is essential. If we don't do that, we will be promoting, particularly us in the built environment industries, will be working in silos and promoting the wrong approaches over and over again. And we have to break out of that cycle and be very imaginative.
Thank you so much for that. I'm afraid that's all we have time for from the audience. I'm going to have to take it to the panel now.
And I was given permission to do one more question from the audience.
I don't know. Yeah? Okay, I'm getting the thumbs up.
Thumbs up? Okay.
Thanks, Tesh.
Are there any final question from the audience?
We have one here at the front. Next to Richard.
Hi, everyone. Great panel. I heard some really interesting stories about what I would call boutique niche projects throughout the developing world. I worry a lot they are slow to scale, which means if we think about the developing countries and the level of economic well-being they want to get to and social well-being, we're talking very long-run kind of transitions, it feels like to me. And that's been our experience. To what extent do you think the rich world has an obligation to go much, much faster to compensate for a much, much slower development and runway in the developing world?
I can take that question. I think running a network, there are also many networks that are working on this kind of scale effect, right? In effect, whether it's our professional network that we're a part of or a city network that our cities are a part of, we are weapons of mass collaboration, right? And that's what you really need to move fast. But I would also say that, you can move absolutely fast with intentions, goals, frameworks, financing tools. But at the end of the day, nations pledge, but it's cities and communities who deliver. So you do need to take the time to localize those solutions or they won't last. And there are countless cautionary tales around that I'm sure we've all experienced. So I think the real fast work that we need to do is our alignment, right, on the shared goals. And I think that's where, if we have that done faster, the rest can fall into place. And one of the most important alignments I think that we need to get around is a shift in this kind of siloed thinking, right? That we can solve it with these silver bullet initiatives rather than having something that's integrated. And one of the things that we will continue to advocate for as a network, but also within this ecosystem. And I hope that you will all hear that call, because building resilience, building a new future, a thriving future, where we're thinking about what kind of quality of life we want to have, a thriving one, not surviving, but actually thriving. It's breaking down those barriers, like stopping the talk about mitigation and adaptation, but actually saying, what is the shared set of values we want to deliver through this massive investment that we are mobilizing and that we are counting, right, at the COP in the billions right now. So I think it's establishing what are our goals to thrive, and then how do we deliver on that.
Thank you. Did you want to come in from maybe a different perspective in terms of some of the UAE citizen communities?
I'll attempt at it from a very different angle. Probably it will be like a curveball, yeah? So I think one thing that we need to, 2 or 3 aspects that we probably better work on. One is to redefine the concept of success in the minds of society. The concept of happiness. Those are very imaginary concepts. So today's the concept of success is that, for a male, for example, is, you finish your studies, you get that job, you get that much money, then you build that house, you get that car, you get that wife, you get those kids, and then you die. And you wonder where is happiness. It's always in the future, it's never today. Yeah? So there are certain concepts in life that drive the economic engine. This is why once you arrive to your 40s, you start wondering, are you a piece of a machine? Yes, you are. So probably the earlier we recognize what is success in life, and how do you imagine quality of life, and what does it really take, then you start managing human expectations and their selfishness, actually, okay? And with that, you start controlling how much growth you need in an economy, really, to satisfy a reasonable quality of life. But is it necessary that the whole world tries to achieve a reasonable level of quality of life? The answer is yes. Unless we try to achieve that for the rest of the world, but a better definition of success or happiness than the Western definition of success and happiness. So something that is more realistic, more in harmony with the world, more in harmony with our fellow creature, yeah? Whether it's human, it's animal, it's plants, a bit more in harmony, then I think setting expectations from the level of the kids at the school, managing that, I think that will be super important. Now, would governments and many of the private sector be happy with that? It goes against their purpose. Their purpose, of the private sector is that they want you to spend more, because otherwise they wouldn't exist. Yeah, governments are now gauged with their GDP per capita and the growth in their. So it's not always in sync. But I think there is a balance point that we need to achieve. One. Now, does the world have to achieve that more reasonable definition of success? The answer is, I believe, is yes. And with that, being protective as countries and economies, I don't think that's helping. Because you either give them money, and that's today $1 trillion a year from the west to the east. They have to give $1 trillion a year from the west to the east to just say we are sorry for what we have done to the environment. and to bring them to a reasonable level for them not to need to emit, to harm the environment further, yeah? But doing it in a more realistic approach is to not block their products. The moment you start being protected, you're not helping. It's gonna happen. People want to have a better quality of life, whatever the definition of that is. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I am going to move to the last question of the panel. And I was wondering, I guess looking back at what we sort of discussed at the opening, what tangible actions are you hoping for to come out of this COP? And also, are you committing to any particular actions for yourself or for your organization? And very brief answers, please.
I do know that there are a lot of actions being done by a lot of countries. The numbers are more than 120 countries are committing to triple their capacity for renewable energy. There's a lot of money that is coming from a lot of economies to try and help with the equation to the poorest economies, all of that. But you know what? I'm always concerned with my actions. Yeah? What is it that I try to contribute with? And from where I am and the industries that I'm involved with, which are predominantly healthcare, education, financial services, and the like. And within the education sphere, I'm quite adamant on to trying to achieve three things. One is developing a realistic curriculum that becomes integrated in everyday's kids' lives. I'm adamant on growing mentors out of teachers through hands-on experience with measures that are meaningful in helping reduce our negative impact to the environment and help with flourishing it actually, and then find a mechanism to involve the parents so that then it becomes second nature to the kids. Everything around them talks about this. And through that, I hope to grow a generation down the line that is able to gauge their quality of life, enhance it for themselves and others, and that's inclusive of the environment being part of their quality of life. So that's what I'm committed to.
Thank you so much. Same question to you, please, Veronica.
For me, Anne, I'm going to use the opportunity because it's actually, I think it's a beautiful question that is on my mind. It's good to do things of scale, but how do you do that exponentially? And so three things I would offer. So first of all, I'm working proactively on partnerships that integrate multidisciplinary approaches because we can only provide some really good, highly sophisticated answers, but that's also why we work with the likes of the organizers with GHD. We know that if we work together, we can get there so much faster, and that's the alignment that Lauren was talking about before. And by the way, it's the alignment that also Casper was talking about before. And so I'm going to build on that. It's how do we take this unique moment that we're living into where we can transform our values and have this total reset and reflect it in the way we operate, report, hold each other accountable. So for me, this COP I'm optimistic, not just because the 70 billion that maybe go to 100 by the time we're done here, but it's because it's the COP where accountability, it's a stock-taking COP, and we know that we're watching each other, not only for what we state during this week, but for how we're going to conduct ourselves in the years to come. And so the metrics, the corporate transition plans, the regulations that we're seeing coming across are all important signals to keep each other accountable to do the things that we say we want to do. The third thing, specifically for the year to come, we started at this COP, it's going to be a personal commitment. How do we build up metrics, language, and practices for adaptation that do respond locally, but also answer the so what collectively on a global scale. And I think we have an important gap of metrics. We've launched this conversation here. We have publications coming out. It's not for the study's sake. It's very much about the projects and making sure that the few projects around flood and heat that we know are backed by absolutely robust research, really translate into hundreds of projects executed in the years to come. So this would be my 3 priorities.
Fantastic. Lauren and Casper, do you also have 3 each? I feel there's a bit of pattern here. No pressure.
So I think for those of you who've been following this conference, a lot of the action for local governments was at the very beginning. And so when I think about what I want to come out of this COP, I think what has come out of this COP was what I would have hoped for. And there was an announcement earlier this week of something that's being called CHAMP, but it essentially commits sovereign governments, national governments, and 63 of them have signed on so far, to align their climate action plans with what's happening at local government level. And so that is a fantastic commitment and innovation. And so my commitments, 2 of them are related to that, and then a 3rd one is more general. And the first one related to CHAMP is also related to something that you were just talking about, which is we have to now align the monitoring tools and the finance so that that can happen. And in that vein, Resilient Cities Network and the work that I will do, I commit to very much doing as a team player. Because I think it's very tempting sometimes, you know, in these different environments, you know, to try to go fast, but actually there's a whole ecosystem of players, and that's actually a very, very useful, I think, proverb that if you want to go far, go together. And this is one of those instances where we have an opportunity to go together. I think the other commitment is just around people. We run a network, and I've been so impressed with the level of conversation, questions, and dialogue with people. I feel like the resilience team is growing, and so I'm very much committed to continuing to build that team and bring more partners into that ecosystem so that we can do this together. And then the last thing is really about women's leadership. And I think that's something that's still so visible at COP, is that we don't have enough women's representation in leadership positions. And so I am very committed to both staying the course and also bringing more young women into this conversation and helping them to find their way into this conversation and into leadership. I had the good fortune to be at a dinner the other night with 180 women who are only working in climate finance. I've been in a lot of rooms in the last 20 years of these negotiations. I've never seen a room like that. And I am very excited to see more rooms like that, but also more women in rooms like this leading the way and contributing.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Last but not least, Casper.
Yes, well, I think, you know, what are we taking home from this? I think, you know, as a board member, I see that so many businesses are still struggling with what is ESG for us. And it's clear that with coming regulation, they will look at this, more compliance, more regulation to live up to. Adil, to pick up on yours, it doesn't improve their life quality. I'm sure that they think that this is just deteriorating life quality. So I think what is really important for us as advisors, as a law firm, you know, is basically helping and taking businesses in their hand and trying to make this live. To become more tangible how we do this, and in that respect I can do a little advertising for a global project that we have participated in. It's called the Chancery Lane Project. It comprised of 3,600 professionals from 113 countries that have been working on 160 model clauses to actually put into your contractual work with suppliers, with clients, with customers, with cooperation partners. So you get a feel of how can this live also when you are trying to obligate each other when you work together. So this and all these model clauses, you can just find them at the project's webpage. So that was a little bit of free advice. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Not often we get that from lawyers. Thank you to all the panelists. I'm going to try and summarize this very, very quickly. And if I can read my own scribbles, that is. I think we started off talking about the just transition needs to be needs-led. You need to start looking at it from a community lens, hearing from diverse voices in terms of, and looking at what's going to work on the ground. It's not about forcing solutions. It's about finding what's possible. That very much place-based approach. It was interesting to hear Veronica talk about climate change as a market failure, and perhaps it's time to find or create new or different markets to look at it. I think there was a real interesting call to sort of rethink what quality of life is or what success is. And now, you know, rethink what economic system or what societal system is really going to deliver the outcomes that we need in order to achieve a just transition. We also heard about hard law being introduced much more now, moving from the voluntary to the mandatory, and how that's driving transparency, and it's about holding businesses to account then in order to deliver on the socio and environmental values as well as economic. We heard a lot of consistent themes in terms of the need for an integrated, collaborative approach, you know, across all societal stakeholders. I loved, and I'm gonna not quote this exactly now, but it's sort of working together will get us there faster. And I'd just like to end with something that, you know, Casper's children told you before coming up. You know, we need action and we need to hurry up. So thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our panelists. It's been fantastic, thank you. And thank you to our audience for your engagement and participation. Just before I let you go to enjoy sort of drinks and networking, you will find this card, hopefully, on your seats. There is a QR code as well that you can scan. That will take you to our virtual library, where you can find lots of our insights, articles, thought pieces, including 2 reports, recent reports on the energy transition and the risks, opportunities associated with that, and also very, very much hot off the press, our Sustainability Monitor, which is a survey of global corporate leaders worldwide looking at why isn't progress being done faster and how can we address some of those challenges. So please do take a look when you have a chance. I'm going to let people go and enjoy some drinks now. And thanks again to our esteemed panelists. Thank you.